Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar entitled Overview of Fair Warning for IAM. My name is Mike Nesson. I'm the Customer Community and Social Media Manager at Fair Warning, and I will be your host. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. We're broadcasting this through WebEx, and the audio is optimized to be heard through your computer speakers or a headset. If you're encountering sound quality or volume issues and need to join the teleconference, the dial-in information can be found on the Info tab at the top left of the screen or by clicking the phone icon on the right menu bar. I hope to have some time at the conclusion of the presentation for a question and answer session, and I encourage you to submit your questions as they come up so they can be placed into the queue for response. To submit a question, simply type them into the Q&A module that appears on the right side of your screen. We are recording this webinar, and a follow-up email is scheduled to be sent to you within 24 hours of its conclusion that will include the link to the replay as well as the materials presented. Additionally, this same information will be posted on our website at www.fairwarning.com. I would like to introduce the panel joining us for today's webinar. First is Mr. Kurt Long, the Fair Warning founder and CEO, who will start our presentation today. Next, we have Mr. Chris Arnold, Fair Warning Vice President of Product Management. And finally, Mr. Mike Lyons, Fair Warning Director of Product Development. Collectively, Kurt, Chris, and Mike have been involved in over 250 privacy monitoring deployments around the world, representing 6,500 healthcare facilities. As you can see from the agenda slide, our panelists will take us through the following topics: the business problem, building on your fair warning investment, fair warning for IAM, unique solution benefits, packaging and pricing, and what's next. And again, we will conclude with a question and answer session. So let's get started and welcome Mr. Kurt Long.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for those of you joining us today. I'm sure you think of fair warning as primarily patient privacy monitoring, but patient privacy monitoring is intimately related to identity for workflow, for filtering, and for analytics. And as part of each and every deployment that we go through, we spend time correlating the users across the various sources, including the applications, in order to provide those analytics, filtering, and workflow. But I think we're all familiar with the problem set in healthcare, and you can already read down the left-hand side what those problems are, and I suspect they resonate with you. Who and where your users are, what permissions, what roles do they have, and then further, what do those roles allow them to do, or what do those permission sets allow them to do? And quite frankly, within healthcare, we know that there is a vast amount of roles. So we'll have customers tell us that we have 25,000 users with 10,000 roles, where the concept of a role almost can even become meaningless. It kind of sinks into access to everything because the roles are so difficult to arrive at and then maintain. And what makes this particularly difficult is that our customers have been and are increasingly facing compliance audits, let alone the information security risks that not having good profiles about their users carries with it. So that's the general problem set that I think everyone on the webinar will recognize, but we wanted to level set today. If we were to be more specific in this highly regulated environment that we're operating in, there's specific provisions in HIPAA around access control, about onboarding persons that can access electronic patient information into an appropriate role or privilege set, offboarding those persons, being able to refine roles and permissions, but of course also being able to audit those roles and permission sets. So We'll call that review and update user access. It's highlighted in red, and you'll hear us refer to that through the presentation. We know that for many of our customers, they have manual or semi-manual processes for onboarding, offboarding, and refining. For others, you may have selected a vendor for what we might call provisioning or identity management, but very few, or if any, are able to fully satisfy all of these mandates that are carried in HIPAA. So that makes it, and we've watched, right? As fair warning, as the founder, my background's in identity management. I've spent my entire career since 1996 in identity management and know the players and have a lot of respect for the existing vendors, both large and small. They're all good vendors, but not many of them, if any at all, really were built special purpose for healthcare. And from my seat, I watched for many years, hoping that one of the vendors would really get it together and understand the affordability requirements for our customers, understand the complexity of the roles in the permission sets, and not do demos that are better for banks and say, if you could imagine, instead of teller, that it said nurse. You know, when I would see these demos, I would cringe and just think, gosh, one of our partners in the identity landscape has to bring a solution to market to help our customers. And today, we're still seeing the same thing, largely. We really haven't seen much progression. We're seeing an average customer receive an identity management, identity and access management proposal that might be $5 million. It might be spread out over 3 years, which adds a lot of risk, both in terms of the project success, but also a lot of risk in terms of meeting compliance dates and getting a return on investment. And we recognize that for most of our customers, this isn't feasible. You know, they're not able to get budget. They can't explain the return on investment. These proposals are made up generally of consulting and planning, or, and they're made up of software or software as a service. And regardless as to whether it's SaaS or software, it's two basic buckets. And the consulting and planning bucket is particularly time-consuming and inexact. So as we began to see this and see no change, we began building a platform to help speed this process on the consulting and planning side in a way that would dovetail with the existing provisioning vendors. And we began that almost 2 years ago and then really accelerated it 18 months ago. And we've brought product to market that's in beta with a major New York City customer today. So that's how we believe the state of the market is. Very frustrating for all of us involved because our platform is just so much better when we're able to consume proper identity. So as we kick this off, I had goals for the product team. That's why I'm on the call today. This is something I had a personal interest in, and I'm going to turn it over to the product team guys. But the goal was, how do we reduce the cost of compliance for our customers in the area of access controls? What could we do to divide that cost by 5 or by 10, or at least portions of that cost, dramatically reduce it? How could we do it in a way that leverages our customers' existing investment, and we're going to cover what that investment is in terms of the data that we're already receiving? Could we do a better job of improving the quality of the planning and role definitions by taking advantage of the fact that we can look at the actual user access trails in the logs? And how can we do this in such a way that we complement existing provisioning and workflow processes for our, so if they are committed to a manual process and not a vendor solution for all of this, could we do it in such a way that they could get through, they could do it in a sustainable way and get through compliance tests and risks that come with it? And then finally, for our customers that were excited about vendor solutions and want full identity management and governance and workflow that comes with that, with provisioning, could we do it in such a way that complements and accelerates that as opposed to competing with it? So those were the top level goals that we and the team came up with and are operating off of. And And Mike Lyons is going to take it from here to tell what his team has been working on for the last 18 months. So Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kurt. So when Kurt came to us with the problem definition and our goals, and we looked at the challenges that we're facing our customers, we realized we were in a unique position. With fair warning for patient privacy monitoring already deployed at a variety of customers and already tied in to a great source of identity information, whether that's Active Directory, Oracle, PeopleSoft, or Lawson, some of the more typical sources of identity information, or we realized that we actually had access to even more information that most vendors didn't, and that being the application audit logs from our EHR system. You know, we're already tied into over 250 different EHR systems today, with an average of 4 systems being set up per customer, going anywhere up to a dozen. And typically when you look at an audit log, you don't think of identity information, you think of who did what when. But what we found is these audit logs actually contain a lot of identity information, whether that's contact information about the user, their address, their email address, their phone number, their department, their cost code. All that information is valuable information to identity. And sometimes that information is even more accurate in the EHR systems than it is in, say, their Lawson or their Active Directory system. So by taking an approach to build fair warning for IAM on top of patient privacy monitoring, you'll see that we can reduce the cost and decrease the amount of time. The cost is because it's built right on top of our platform, but the time's even more important. There's not enough of it these days. And we've already spent a lot of times with our customers integrating in these different systems, mapping the information from the variety of sources, the EHR systems, the Oracles, the Active Directories, and we've realized that we could build on top of patient privacy monitoring and take advantage of all of that hard work that's already been done. This really helps roll out an identity solution much quicker and much cheaper. So we realized that the actual deployment of the application could be done via our private service cloud. So while I'm not ready to hit the big green button yet to push fair warning for identity access management out to all customers, by building it in our private service cloud, it does make that deployment as easy as an upgrade to our 3.1 platform. We're going to talk a little bit later about where we are in the timing with the, Kurt referred to our beta program. So right now we do have it out in at least one customer, and we are set up to push it out through the private service cloud. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to deliver. So you've got these cast of characters out there located in different systems, whether it's Active Directory, an EHR system, another HR system like Lawson. And what we're trying to do is discover who all these people are, correlate them together, and then, based off of your current provisioning rules, figure out who they are, put together a single view of their identity. While doing that, cleanse the information about these users. And what I mean by cleansing information is, let's take an example. If I get hired and I get an entry into the Lawson system as HR, and let's say I have a home address and a work address in Lawson, and then I also get access to an EHR system, and I also have my work address in there. Well, over time, I may change jobs, and my work address may be updated in the EHR system, but someone forgets to update it over in the Lawson system. So what we can do through our rule definitions is we can decide that we're going to always pull the user's work address from the EHR system and pull the user's home address from Lawson. Now, if the address doesn't exist in the EHR system, we can fall back to pulling it from Lawson. But what this gives us is the cleanest view of the user in a central location. So, for example, if we're looking to find out who William Doe is here, we could take information from Active Directory, from the EHR system, and from Lawson, and we may pull his email address from Active Directory, his title from the EHR system, and his employee ID from Lawson, and put that into a centralized repository. So now we've got a clean view of William Doe, who he is, and several attributes about him. The question is, what can we do with it now that we have it in a central repository? So we can help fill in the gaps in your existing HIPAA access control process. In the previous slide, if you look at the pie chart on the right, We discovered the identities, we correlated them, we cleaned them, we centralized them, so now we can report on them. That reporting, based on what we've already done in patient privacy monitoring, similar to that, how we can report on what people do based off the access logs, we can actually also now report off of who they are and attributes about users and what they're doing. This audit of the identity process provides what you need for HIPAA compliance. So some examples of the reports that we can generate, and these are just 3 examples. We're working on a whole suite of examples. But the first example is access after termination date. So if I get a feed from an HR system that says this employee is no longer employed, he's terminated, and I have him linked to an application ID, and I see access in the access logs in that application, on that application ID, I can report that. Now that may be due to the fact that, the worst case is the person's truly terminated and is still accessing the system. It may be due to a shared account where a coworker still has access to the terminated user's account and is using it. But either way, it's a situation that needs to be looked into. The second example listed is the discovery of unknown users. And what I mean by unknown users is best explained with an example from our first beta client. The very first report we ran for them discovered a list of unknown users. They had a business rule that said everybody that has access to any of their EHR systems should exist in one of their authoritative user systems, whether that's Active Directory or another system. They had multiple. And when we ran our first unknown users report, we found a whole population of users who didn't have entries in any of their authoritative user systems. Now, these users turned out to be rightfully accessing the system. They were appropriate to have access. But what happened is over time, over acquisitions and growth and changes in business processes evolving, there was a whole population of affiliates and contractors who were given access, appropriate access to EHR systems, but weren't being tracked in the central HR systems. The third example I've got listed there is the discovery of orphan accounts. What I mean by orphan accounts are people who have been given appropriate access to an EHR system, but are no longer using it for one reason or another. They could have changed roles, they could have had their job may have stayed the same, but their responsibilities day-to-day may have changed. So they're no longer using these accounts that they have access to. Having these people who don't need access to systems still have access increases your risk, your security risk, as well as your cost, because you're now paying for a license for a system where someone's not using it. So the discovery report helps both on the security side and helps on the cost side. So again, these are just 3 examples. We're working on a whole suite of examples. So about 3 years ago, we introduced Fair Warning Ready. It was Fair Warning Ready for our security and our healthcare applications. And what this has done, it used the aggregate voice of you, our customers, to help drive cooperation with our vendors through standards. And the end result benefits everybody. It drives down the cost of our deployments, the cost of maintenance, not just our deployments of our software, but the deployment of every vendor's software, now that they're operating off of a standard interface. And so when we came to Fair Warning Ready for IAM, we launched Fair Warning Ready for Identity, which is a similar program where we're working with the IAM vendors, the IAM, IdM vendors, to define a standard interface for exchanging information. The type of information we're exchanging is twofold. We're giving them our centralized identity repository to help them, identifies what the roles are, who should have access to what, as well as they're giving us back their central repository, which helps us and keeps our repository up to date and more accurate. And the alerts and reports that we talked about on the previous slide, where I can identify problems in the process and point that back out to them. For example, the terminated user account, they could turn around and follow up and realize that an account was not deprovisioned properly. So I'm happy and proud to announce that Cloud Connect is our first certified partner for Fair Warning Ready for Identity. They're an Oracle Gold partner. However, if you're working with another IAM vendor or thinking about working with them and you'd like to nominate them to participate in this program, it follows the same pattern as our other Fair Warning Ready programs. Just reach out to your client success manager and we'll be in contact with the with the vendors.
Hey, Mike, and this is Kurt, and I just want to interject a little bit about Cloud Connect. Cloud Connect is this fully owned subsidiary of UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and UPMC was our Visionary of the Year in our first Privacy Excellence Awards, largely on the power of their identity management deployment that integrated with Fair Warning. And so what they've done is they've partnered with Oracle to bring an identity management offering that's more tailored for healthcare. So they are a young vendor, but they're very focused on healthcare, and they come from a background that is success. They literally have been running identity, I believe, since 2006 or 2007, and that's why you see their name first. Right. So we just want to thank them for getting this program going, and hope people consider them.
Yeah, very bright group of guys.
Yeah. Okay.
So in summary, what we're doing with Fair Warning for IAM, we discover all the identities, we find out who the users are, we correlate and cleanse the information, we centralize it for reporting purposes. We can automate it through our enforced policies to make it acceptable for your HIPAA access control review. And that's not a one-time review. With the automated alerts, it can be an ongoing and provide that feedback that's needed to either your manual processes, which we can complement, or to an IAM vendor if you have integrated with one. And through the Fair Warning Ready program, we can accelerate that deployment of a Fair Warning, of a IAM vendor. So there's our cast of characters. So hopefully at the end of the day, we'll be able to tell you exactly where Santa Claus is hiding.
And his most recent address.
And his most recent address.
The North Pole.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
All right. Thanks, Mike. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is, what are the unique, what is Fair Warning bringing to market, and what's unique about our solution and the benefits there. And we've talked about these things, but I'm going to reiterate a couple of the topics. And one is that we're discovering and building identities from authoritative user sources and access logs. That's unique. Nobody else is able to do that. And that's because we're already consuming and bringing in those access logs from over 250 different applications. So for all of you that have, worked with us and done the implementations and are currently using Fair Warning, patient privacy monitoring, that that's a lot of work and that's a big effort. You're going to already have that benefit and benefit from that work and time, as Mike was talking about earlier. And from there, from that data, we're able to then analyze the roles, the permissions, and the actual use based on those activity, the activity in those access logs. For those of you who are familiar with identity access management deployments or implementations, a lot of that work when you're doing discovery of users and roles is through an interview process where you may go out and look at each department and say, well, what are the roles that your people should have in this department? What should they have access to do? We can already start that. We know what the roles are. We know what people are already doing, and so that's, when we talk about speeding up and accelerating and improving those identity access management projects, that's how we're doing it, because you're starting well ahead of the game on those. And so that's how you also reduce your time and expense, because you're leveraging the investment that you've already made. You've made the investment in time, in energy, and in data by giving us your best data. And as Mike talked about, when we look at, we already know in working with you for all those authoritative user data, we know a lot of your identity rules already, so you're going to benefit from that. And as we talked about, the other benefit is that this is filling in a gap that a lot of customers have, and it's the thing to take away from this is that you don't have to be looking at an identity access management system to already have this gap. This can also help you with your manual process. If you have a manual process to do your provisioning and deprovisioning, today you already have to go out and do a review of all these access controls. And what we're able to do and help you do is automate that process. And the other big benefit of this is that it's a patent pending solution. So it's, you know, it's protected just like our patient privacy monitoring solution. This is we have patents on our solution there. For our fair warning for identity, we have a patent pending solution. So what I'd like to talk about next is kind of the packaging it up and you know, what does this mean? So we're looking second half of 2014, and for your base fair warning license, you'll be have the ability to strengthen your core analytics, strengthen your filtering, and have delegated incident review built upon fair warning for identity. There will be a new license that will then allow, enable the full automated access control review. And so that would include building out the reports, doing automated enforced policies, alerting, investigation capabilities, and then also being able to connect that and export that to an identity access management system. So if you're working with you know, Cloud Connect, or you're working with any of the other vendors, if you want to take the central central identity repository and share that with those other systems, that would be enabled through the full license.
Yeah, and just a little around where the philosophy comes from is, and why it's structured in this manner, is that, you know, we're the class #1 vendor, and the thing that we're probably the proudest of is that 100% have indicated that we keep our promises. And so when we talk about patient privacy monitoring, we think it's reasonable that a customer might say, listen, we think that we should have the best filtering, the best analytics, and even good identity information to base our workflow on. So philosophically, we want to deliver on that part of the promise under our existing support contract, and that's why that's going to be included in your base fair warning license without incremental software costs. However, this is our first offering in identity, and it is an entirely new product where we are making a significant investment of resources in literally incurring expenses. So philosophically there, since it's brand new functionality, we would this would be the second half would be a for charge portion. But Sadie, I think you had some survey. Did you have survey questions at this time? We're hoping that people could take a few minutes or a moment or two to fill out.
Yes, sir. We're just going to open the poll on the right-hand side of your screen, so if you would take just a minute to...
And we have a little bit more content, but you've seen the bulk of it today.
Mm-hmm.
Leave this poll open here for just a minute while everybody answers, and then we'll move on.
And I would like to remind you, as you're doing this survey, once you complete the survey, that if you have any other questions, to please submit them into the Q&A module that's on the right side of your screen, and we will address them at the end of this presentation.
We've got a whole bunch of people just still in the middle of the survey, guys. So we're going to wait for one more minute here.
We have what's ahead in the slide deck, what's next, so how to become involved. We're going to explain what the availability, how and when people might be able to become involved if they were interested in the beta program,
right. And
then just a little bit of wrap up.
Just a little bit of wrap up, yeah.
So we can let them, you know, whenever, if you want to jump in here or let them finish, whichever you want to do, guys.
I mean, we can let them finish, or I can just jump in. So, so today, as Kurt was mentioning, right now we're in production with a major beta site, and just to give you a little perspective of what that means, and where some of the information, you know, the numbers that we came out with, is that, so this beta site, it has, you know, 22,000 unique users, unique identities across their organization, and that's you know, just touching on a few of their audit applications right now. And, you know, as Mike was talking earlier, we did find, you know, just they had given us, they thought that they were able to identify and say, well, you know, our current provisioning process is this, and so here's the rule. If the user doesn't exist in Active Directory and they don't exist in Lawson, then they should not have an access into, you know, we'll call it Epic. And lo and behold, you know, the first report, we ended up finding 160, you know, plus names that were there. So, you know, so we know that you know, people are definitely interested in this. Today, we're currently we're accepting 5 more beta sites. So if you're interested in applying to become a beta site, then you should talk to your customer success manager.
Or you're not hard to figure out. You're
yeah, I mean, everybody.
Fairwarning.com. You were the first Chris.
I'm the first Chris, and I'm still the.
Are you still the only?
Well, Christian, but yeah. So you can contact me at chris@fairwarning.com. There's a number of you that are on the call that I've met and talked with on a regular basis. But definitely, I'd recommend talking to your customer success manager on that. There is certain requirements and criteria in order for you to be successful during this implementation. So I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's pretty straightforward. You know, you want to have authoritative user data. You want to have multiple application sources to be able to review typical things. There is a time, you know, we would do a weekly meeting with you, so there is some time investment as well. And we're looking at a general availability as early as August 1st for this new product.
For existing customers.
For our existing customers only.
Yeah.
And what else can you do? Was the
so on the GA and on the GA is August 1st. The reason we're holding that just a little bit is the product seems to be in really good shape. Has gone through the first beta site well, but we want to better understand the processes surrounding it and what the impact has back to different kinds of customer environments. The first one we did was in GE with primarily GE apps, and we'd love to see Cerner, Epic, McKesson, Allscripts, Meditech, and see what the impact is going to be in each of those environments prior to a general availability. And that's why we're, even though we're confident in the product, that's why we're going through the process of doing these additional beta sites. And I believe we have all the survey questions all wrapped up, Sadie.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and then I think we have a whole bunch of questions, Mike, for the panelists here.
Okay. Thank you, Sadie, and thank you everybody. We do have a few questions to go through. The first one is simply, what is the private service cloud?
Yep. And for those of you who've been with Fairwarning as a customer for some time, you probably remember that for each customer, and this is a general statement, there's a few exceptions, particularly those in the United Kingdom, but in the U.S., it's very few exceptions. The idea that we have a point-to-point VPN connection from Fairwarning to our device on-premise, or if you're a software as a service customer, into our data center. And regardless, it gives us the ability to both monitor your deployment as well as produce an effectiveness report for you monthly. But it also gives us the ability to push software updates relatively seamlessly. If you're on the 3.1 platform, if you're not on 3.1, it's a little bit more of an upgrade. So when Mike talked about distributing through the private service cloud, it would be a matter of updating their current 3.1 implementation to a version that included Fairwarning for IAM, and then you would need to begin the configuration of that. And we've come to call that the private service cloud because it's become essential to our business operations.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. The next question that I have is kind of lengthy. It says, I can understand the exception type reporting that is being discussed, but the system is currently not an IAM. Audit requires that we are able to show who requested and approved access to systems for an individual, as well as on an annual basis. The manager must review the user's access and attest that they still need that access. This is just telling us who is using it, not how or when they got access, or that they should still have it.
So there's a few things in there. We have a history concept that we can speak to. there's an automation concept. Is there another concept in there to speak to?
The approval.
The approval.
So what you guys, Chris or Mike, you got that?
I'll let you start.
Sure.
Sure.
So first,
That's a good question.
Yeah,
It's
the
a little
question,
lengthy, but it was a good question.
So the first one on the approval, right now there is no mechanism for tracking approval. We'll take that back and look at it. But, you know, the 3 examples that I went over earlier were just, like I said, simple examples. We do provide, you know, simple reporting for just give me a list of who has access to which systems. And that does meet part of the request in that question. And that's usually the very first report customers want to see is, all right, now you know who the users are across all these systems. Tell me what they have access to.
And that's an automated thing.
And that's automated. So you can run the report on demand. You can have it scheduled.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's an automated thing.
Then there was a history.
Yeah, and then there's a history one. So, you know, and so the other part of this is that there is a history with the identity solution, and that we track changes to those users over a period of time. So if they were terminated, we have the date that we received the update from, whether it's lost in our Active Directory for that termination date, whether they were, you know, deprovisioned or, you know, made inactive from an Epic or a Cerner, we would also capture that data as well. So that date would be available within the history. So you can do a history report on a particular user, and you can see how their access has changed across different systems over a period of time. And then you can also use that history in conjunction with the access logs and be able to see, okay, I can see, you know, that their privilege changed or their role has changed, and why, you know, why do they have access into these other systems over that period of time.
So can you do a history on any field, Chris, that's maintained in the centralized user repository? Yeah. So you can do a historical audit of every field and where it changed and when it changed?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. When we receive the change.
Yes.
there's a slight, right? Yeah, so if we get it daily, we would get it the next day.
And was there another part of that question? The only part on the audit side where the managers are reviewing that by hand, this would be more of an automation of that and removing the manual processes. I would imagine the manager might have a final outlook of approval, but they would all lay out for them.
I mean, if you combine this with our delegated instant review, you could automate it to once a month, once a year, farm the results of these reports out as alerts to the managers and for the managers to review them and, you know, comment on them in the alert.
Yeah, it would be, so for example, right, should this user still have access to the Epic system, and you could create an enforced policy that once a year went to that user's manager, and they could say yes or no.
Okay. The next question I have, I think, was mentioned once already, but it's probably worth repeating. The question is, what is the anticipated time frame to fully deploy this tool and rule sets?
In summary form, in beta now. We want 5 more betas. We're able to accommodate those basically immediately. There's we push that down via the private service cloud, so it's a minimum amount of deployment in terms of the software, so long as you're on 3.1. There's a configuration component where the customer would need to consult with us to configure the rules, and then we're looking, so that's available now as beta. And then the earliest date for a broad availability to the existing customers is August 1st. So we just want to get through a few more deployments before we would broadly release. Mike?
I think there was another meaning to that question as well.
Okay.
Is when I do get to deploy it, how long does it take to deploy?
Yes.
Because we've talked about accelerating the deployment time of IdM. Now, we don't have enough metrics around that yet.
Yes.
You know, we're still in the beta program to say, you know, an average customer deployment takes, you know, 4 weeks, 16 weeks,
yes,
2 weeks, whatever it is yet. That's one of the things we're working on, is working out the processes and the timing of that through the beta program.
At least in the first beta, though, it was, if you've already deployed Fair Warning, it was a pretty quick process.
Yeah, the first beta the first beta we got up in probably a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Before we were able to generate the first couple of reports.
Yes.
A lot of what we're trying to learn through the beta is what it is they're trying to find, you know, what it is we're trying to audit for them. And that's where the time's taking. Since we are building on top of what we already have deployed at Fair Warning, like Chris talked about earlier, we've already done the mapping, we've already done the rules discovery. It doesn't take long at all, that piece.
we'll have more, so that's a general overview. We'll have more concrete data in the weeks and months ahead, it sounds like. Yep.
All right, this next question how does this compare to a full identity lifecycle management suite? And second part of this question, how can this be compared to Microsoft FIM or any other products?
Well, we're going to automate a lot of the role definition, a lot of the centralization of the identities in a much more efficient, faster way. So that's the good news. On the other side of the coin, we're not trying to do provisioning. So we would, if someone did want a vendor solution to complement this, we would look to, do they call it FIM now? I think they're calling it FIM. You'd look to FIM to do the actual provisioning part, and we would feed the data in.
Mm-hmm. Or any of the other partners that we have in the identity. And that's where Cloud Connect comes in. That's how you get that full suite, right? For the solution.
So in effect, we create the intelligence about the identities, the roles, and the permissions based on the existing data as well as the actual access. We turn that over to a provisioning vendor, I'm going to call them provisioning vendor, to actually do the provisioning to the systems based on those roles and permissions.
All right, the next question is, what happens if there is differing information, for example, home address from different AU sources? Can we see all 3 or 4 home addresses for that person/user?
So all that information is tracked, but at the end of the day, through the rule definition, we decide which one is the most accurate. So we do have that information for reporting purposes, so I could show you what it is, but no, everything we're doing off of the automated alerts is based off of what we determine is the most accurate.
And where there are complications or collisions, there is a manual review process as well that the end user can go through and make these discriminating decisions. But in terms of the core address there, it's the field selected as precedence rules.
Correct, and so I mean the thing to think about too, or to understand is that you're talking about, at the end what you're creating is a clean identity, and so that should have you should have one user home address, right? And so that home address is going to be the best address based off of the data that you get from those 4 systems. And so when you're doing your reporting, you're building your analytics or your enforced policies, you're going to use that one address. But as Mike said, you will be able to go back and see where that address came from. So if you have 4 different addresses, you can see what the 4 different addresses were, but when you're using it in your enforced policies, you're going to use the best one.
Okay, the next question is, who can we contact to learn more about being a data site?
Well, you can contact me.
Or your customer success.
Or your customer success manager.
Okay.
Me being Chris at Fairwarning.
I'm sorry,
And then there's a handful of other technical questions, but they're very detailed, and let's take those offline. I would like to see you guys follow up with those.
Absolutely.
But Mike, is that about the end of the questions?
I think we're at the end, and we will answer any of those other questions offline. So that is all the time that we have today. So please look for the follow-up emails within 24 hours. And if you have any additional requests, you can reach us at fairwarning.com. And I also invite you to follow us on Twitter at FairWarningInc. So thank you all very much for attending, and have a wonderful afternoon.